The surgeon found me in the hallway. Not in the room where my daughter was fighting to stay alive, in the hallway, standing between two security guards and my older sister Dana, who had arranged herself against the ICU doors like she owned them. Which, given our family's relationship to ownership, probably felt natural to her. "Sir." The guard nearest me had his hand raised, not quite touching my arm. "Family only." "Sir, he is family," I said, because I'd been saying some version of that sentence for 11 years. Dana turned toward me with the particular expression she reserved for situations she believed she was managing. "There's been some confusion," she told the guard. "This is our family's personal driver. He's been with us for years. Very devoted. But the policy is clear." I had stopped crying somewhere between the parking garage and the third floor. What replaced it was something quieter and more precise. I watched Dana perform her competence for the security team, and I thought, she actually believes this will work. Then the ICU doors opened. My wife came through them, still in her surgical cap, the ties loose around her neck, her eyes moving across the hallway until they found mine. Dr. Renata Solis, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at St. Augustine Medical Center. The woman I had married at a courthouse in Austin 11 years ago, with her mother and my college roommate as witnesses. She looked at the guard. She looked at Dana. She looked at me. "Why is my husband in the hallway?" Have you ever watched someone realize in real time that a plan has failed? Not just failed, reversed. Dana's expression moved through several stages in quick succession: confusion, recognition, the specific horror of a person who has deployed a weapon. Renata didn't wait for an explanation. She stepped past the guard, took my hand, and said, "Lily is stable. Come inside." I went inside. My family, the Aldercott side, had never accepted Renata. This requires some context. My father, Warren Aldercott, built a regional insurance empire in the 1980s and spent the following decades converting money into the particular kind of social authority that masquerades as culture. My mother, Constance, was the architect of our family's reputation. Every charity board membership, every club affiliation. My sister Dana had performed admirably, marrying a mergers attorney named Graham who spent his summers in the right places and his winters making the right calls. And then there was me, Philip, who had fallen in love with a surgical resident from San Antonio, whose parents owned a tire shop, and who had worked her way to the top of her field through 15 years of relentless, precise labor. A doctor, my mother had said, the first Thanksgiving I'd brought Renata home. She'd managed to make the words sound like a mispronunciation of something worse. How very industrious. "She's going to be one of the best cardiac surgeons in the country," I'd said. "Surgeons work with their hands, Philip." Renata had heard all of it. She'd finished her wine, thanked my mother for dinner, and never returned to that house. We'd married 6 months later. My family did not attend. What they did not know, and what I had never corrected them on, was that Renata had assembled the team now working on our daughter. Lily was 10 years old, funny and loud and astonishing in the specific way that children are when they've absorbed the best of two people. She'd collapsed at swim practice 3 days earlier. An arrhythmia, hidden and waiting, the kind that announces itself without warning. The surgery had been scheduled for that morning. Renata couldn't operate on Lily. No surgeon operates on their own child. But she had called in the best people she knew, which meant the best people in the region. It wasn't supposed to go wrong. Then Lily's heart had stuttered on the table, and the code alarm had sounded, and I had been in the family waiting room alone when Dana arrived. I hadn't told my family. Hospitals have boards, and boards have members, and members talk. Someone at St. Augustine knew someone who knew someone, and the information had traveled through the usual channels until it reached my mother. Not to help. To represent. Dana had found me tear-blind and barely functional. She'd settled into the chair across from me and said, "Mother thought someone should be here," in a tone that implied Renata's absence from the waiting room was evidence of marital indifference rather than the fact that my wife was coordinating a surgical response to our daughter's cardiac arrest. When the code alarm sounded 20 minutes later, I ran. Dana followed. She moved faster, reaching the nurse's station first, already speaking to the security team by the time I arrived. "That man," she'd said, and pointed at me, a gesture so casual it must have taken practice. He's not family. He's employed by the family. The father is on his way. I was wearing a gray pullover and hadn't shaved in 3 days. I understood how I looked. "Sir," the guard had said, "I'm going to need you to step back. My daughter is behind those doors." My voice had been steady, which surprised me. "I am her father." "That's what he keeps saying," Dana told them. "He's very attached." It's a difficult situation. Renata came through the doors before I found any more words. What happened after was swift and in its way complete. Dana was escorted from the building. The hospital's incident team documented the encounter. Interference with patient family access, false report to security staff, impersonation of a family representative. Renata didn't press for formal action. I asked her not to, and she agreed because Lily's recovery deserved to happen in quiet. But the Aldercott reputation is a social infrastructure, and social infrastructure is fragile in specific ways. The people who mattered in that world, the board members, the donors, the families whose children went to the same schools and whose names appeared on the same programs, heard about what Dana had done. The story moved through the same networks that had delivered Dana to the hospital in the first place, only now it carried different cargo. "Did you hear about Warren Aldercott's daughter? Tried to have her own brother-in-law removed from the hospital while his daughter was in surgery. Called him the help. My mother called 4 days later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail in the careful, measured tone she used when managing a situation she'd already decided was a misunderstanding. I deleted it. Lily came home 3 weeks later. She spent 2 months recovering in a way that looked from the outside like ordinary childhood: books, complaints about the no-running rule, arguments about screen time, and then she was herself again, maybe more herself, with the particular confidence of someone who has been close to something and returned. She asked about the hallway. We'd discussed how much to tell her, Renata and I, and we had decided on the truth in age-appropriate portions. "Your Aunt Dana told the hospital I wasn't your father," I told her. "She said I was an employee." "Why?" "Because our family never accepted Renata. They thought she wasn't good enough because of where she came from. Dana was trying to punish me for marrying her." Lily was quiet for a moment. "That's a really stupid reason." "Yes." "Are we going to see them again?" "No," she nodded, with the uncomplicated acceptance that children sometimes have for facts that adults spend years negotiating. "Good." I didn't really like how they talked about Mom anyway. My parents tried once more, 6 months after the incident. They arrived at our door unannounced, my father in his good coat, my mother with the expression she wore when she was prepared to be gracious. Renata answered, because she'd been home between shifts, and I stood behind her. "We'd like to see Lily," my mother said. "No," Renata said. "We're her grandparents. You spent 10 years pretending she didn't exist unless it was convenient to mention her." Renata's voice was the same voice she used in surgical briefings, exact without weather. "Your daughter told a security team that Philip was an employee, so she could keep him from Lily, while Lily was in cardiac arrest. And you called 4 days later to tell us it was a misunderstanding." She paused. "It wasn't a misunderstanding." She closed the door. "They didn't come back. I saw Dana once more about a year later. A hospital foundation gala. The kind of event where Renata was being recognized for a training program she'd built for residents from under-resourced hospitals. We were there because the work mattered to her, because she had come from exactly the kind of place that program was designed to serve. Dana was there, of course. These events were her native terrain. She saw me across the room, and for a moment I thought she might approach, might attempt some calibrated public gesture of repair. Instead, she turned and walked to the opposite side of the room. Renata found me watching. "You okay?" "I'm fine." And I meant it in a way that had taken time to become true. "She can't reach us anymore." Renata looked at me the way she sometimes does, as if checking something. "She couldn't reach us before. She just thought she could." That's the thing I've had to sit with in the years since. My family had spent decades making me feel like a category error, someone who had made a wrong turn and produced the wrong life. but Renata had become the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at a major medical center. Our daughter had survived something that kills people every year. And when it mattered most, my wife had walked through those doors and chosen me in front of everyone who thought they understood the hierarchy of our lives. The people who raised me never chose me. The family I built with Renata chooses me every day. Lily turns 12 next month. She's joined the swim team again, which her cardiologist cleared and which she announced with the specific satisfaction of someone reclaiming something. Renata is taking 3 days off, almost unheard of. And we're planning something small and deliberate and ours. Dad, Lily asked me last week in the offhand way she asks the questions that matter most. When I'm older, will you be there? For everything. I pulled her into a hug. Every moment you'll let me witness. Every hard thing and every ordinary Tuesday. Promise? Promise. My sister called me a hired driver while my daughter was in cardiac arrest. My wife walked out of the ICU to find out why her husband was standing in a hallway. The security guard turned white. And I understood in that terrible corridor that the family willing to show up for you will always outweigh the family that trained you to feel grateful for the scraps of their attention. Lily is healthy. Renata is my home. The Aldercotts are strangers. I've thought a long time about what it costs to finally believe you deserve the life you've built. The answer, I think, is almost everything, and then nothing at all. Have you ever asked yourself how long you spent waiting for people who never intended to arrive?